Hi, everyone. Today, me and Hellevorn are going to be talking about The Lady from the Sea, which is a play by the Norwegian playwright Henrik Ibsen. This has long been one of her favorite works, and we are analyzing some of the major themes and characters of this story, as well as how it connects to one of her characters, Merwyn, who has, been written about in the Tales from the North, which you can read using a link in the description on Tapas.
Right, exactly. Hello, everyone.
Right. So the first question we have is the play is inspired by a Scandinavian folktale, Agneta and the Sea King. What's this folktale about?
I have it here in the Swedish Folktales book, and I'm going to show you some beautiful illustrations by John Bauer. We can see here Agneta, who is a princess who falls in love with a merman. And she falls deeply and obsessively in love with him as if under a spell. And he takes her to the bottom of the sea to his kingdom, where she stays for 7 years and has seven children with her. And she only manages to break free from his spell after she hears the church bells ringing and it is then that she decides to go on land again and to leave the merman and the children that they have together and remain on land with her father.
Mm.
So Ibsen's plays mirrors these ideas wonderfully, adapting it to a 19th century scenario. And Agneta becomes Ellida Wangel. The merman becomes a mysterious sailor that she had a relationship with in her past. And her father, interestingly, becomes Dr. Wangel, who is Elida's husband and not her father.
Right. And I think we can see a lot of parallels already with your story of Merwyn, who has her own novella, by the way, which explains the parallels more obviously. Because in the short story, it's only alluded to, but in the actual Merwyn short story, which you wrote, I think in 2016 or so, we actually see her love affair with the man who is a lot like the merman, because he also has these mythological qualities, and he is, though he is not really a sailor per se, he's more of an adventurer, but he's also someone who always spends a lot of time at sea.
Exactly, and the sea and their passion for it is something that the two of them have in common, just like Elida and the sailor.
Hmm. So, what are the themes of Ibsen's play?
Freedom and isolation, I would say it is the most prominent theme represented in the sea, freedom and the isolation of the small Norwegian town that this takes place in, and also marriage and love. So, the questions that it poses are: how important is love in a marriage? Does love mean loyalty and stability, which are represented by Alida's husband, or passion and obsession, represented by the sailor?
Hmm. Right. Ibsen is someone who writes a lot about 19th century gender roles for women, which were quite limited, especially in, these rural Norwegian settings where, there's not many opportunities. And I think it was only the 1860s where women were allowed to go to university.
That's true. In this scenario, we will talk about it as well. The one of the female characters could go to college, yes. But often women would stay in these marriages of convenience because it was just the worldview that everybody was used to at the time, and these choices that a female character has are often brought forward in Ibsen's writings and the lack thereof.
Hmm. So, what is the plot of the play?
Ellida Wangel is a young Norwegian woman who is married to a man who's much older than herself, and he's a widower who has two teenage daughters. After the death of the 5-month-old baby, their relationship starts to fall apart, with Ellida becoming depressive and spending more and more time alone. Every day she goes out to bathe in the fjord because she grew up in the middle of the sea. Her father was a lighthouse keeper, and she misses it very much, and she feels trapped in this small town where she had to move after her marriage. And when her former lover, a sailor who was accused of murder and had to run away, returns and wants to renew their relationship, Elida must choose between him and her husband. And when her
Mhm.
husband gives her the freedom to choose, she actually chooses him over the sailor. So this is the plot of the story, and it is a really interesting idea in the end of the play, because it's very different from the resolution of A Doll's House, which is the most famous of Ibsen's plays, where the
Mhm.
woman actually leaves her husband and her children in order to go out into the world and to live a life of her choice, and to find herself.
Mhm. Right. She's literally leaving the doll's house. That's why it's called the doll's house.
Yes, exactly. So she wants to define herself more independently, and not through her roles as wife and
Mhm.
mother as she was in her marriage with her husband. But with
Mhm.
Elida, it is quite different, as we see, but it is no less interesting and deep from a psychological standpoint, and we will discuss this shortly.
Right. Do you think it's also a generational thing? Because from the synopsis I've read of the play, her stepdaughters have a different idea about this compared to her. At least one of them, because one of them goes to university and she wants to leave, right? And the other one, I think she marries, or was it the one who went to university? She
Yeah.
marries the tutor because she wants to leave the small town.
Exactly, exactly, yes. No, I don't really think that was the idea with why Elida chooses to stay. But she chooses to stay because what she really wanted was not some kind of passionate love, but she actually wanted the freedom to choose. So once she has
Mm.
the freedom to choose, she doesn't really need to go with the sailor anymore, because she didn't actually love him.
That makes a lot of sense. And, that has even more parallels with Merwyn because we did explore, I think, in a private conversation, though not so much in a podcast. So this is her first time we're talking about this, that she actually likes Halvard because, she associates these mythological qualities to him, seeing him as the Lord while she is the lady, as we saw in the story. And, she always talks about him in a very mythological manner to her son, Aiden. So Ida never really gets a clear idea of who this lover really is and whether he is actually his father, he doesn't even know. But
Exactly.
yes, so it kind of suggests that Merwyn never truly loved Halvard as a person, but more as an idea that could take her away from how bad her own reality was.
Exactly. So neither my character Merwyn nor Ellida Wangel are really after the ideal romance. So they would see no point in just exchanging one man for another, and especially exchanging her husband in the case of Elida, whom she knows and who has proven himself to be loyal and to love her, to exchange him for a man that she barely even knows. So that's really
Mhm.
not the point of the story.
Exactly. And for Merwyn, I think the contrast is that she's not choosing him over anyone per se. I mean, of course, the Earlderman, who is also an older man she's married to, but unlike Ellida Wangel's husband, he's actually really terrible to her. So, I mean, there isn't really a choice. I think the choice for Merwyn isn't so much between Halvard and the Earlderman, but Halvard and her own sense of wanting to stay where she is because she's uncertain about the future. Like she doesn't know Halvard that well, just like Elita
Exactly.
doesn't know the sailor that well. So she's not willing to risk everything to go to a new country with him, which was what, was suggested in the novella that, he would take her away to Scandinavia, but then she didn't want that because that would be too much of a change. And she doesn't know him that well.
Exactly. So she doesn't want to go into an uncertain situation, and also she's not really looking for romance and a relationship. She wants a steadier relationship with herself. I think this is the what she actually desires, and that this is the really the freedom that she wants. Because in going away with Halvard, it's I'm not sure it would really be the freedom that she wants to. The kind of freedom that she would like is not possible in her day and age, at least not for her. So this is one of the reasons why she doesn't choose to go away with him.
Mhm. And also, she is someone, I think, who's also focused on her son. You could say that she's
Yeah.
choosing between the life she has with Aiden, and as a noblewoman over being, I don't know what, in Scandinavia, because she would lose her title,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And unlike Elida, who doesn't really have, I mean, she doesn't have children of her own. She only has her husband's children. Merwyn has a son, and her relationship with her son is very fulfilling. So this is
Mhm.
one other reason why she doesn't regret not leaving with her lover.
Right, exactly. So, how is Ellida Wangel like? How is her personality like, and how would you say she compares to Merwyn?
People in town nickname her the Heathen because she was named after an old ship instead of being named after a saint. And other people call her the mermaid because she goes out to bathe every day. So she is seen as quite of an um, someone who is, outside of norm, someone who is quite eccentric. Her husband, Dr. Wangel, describes her as being changing as the sea because she doesn't really understand her. He realizes that she is unhappy. And I have a quote here. You cannot bear your surroundings. The mountains crush you and weigh upon your heart. Nothing is open enough for you here. The heavens above are not spacious enough. The air is not strong and bracing enough. So he sees that she is longing for some kind of a freedom that she doesn't have here. He sees that she feels trapped, but he doesn't really understand her beyond this. So, well, in those comparisons of her as a heathen or a mermaid, we see that there is a duality in her character, the existence of something dark and wild within her that contrasts with the dull and peaceful life that she is leading. So I think that in this she has a lot in common with Merwyn, and it would be a good point to state here that I did not consciously draw inspiration from this story, but I read it a long, long time ago when I was in my first year of university, and at that time I had not created Merwyn's character, and I completely forgot about this play of Ibsen's until I read it last week. And then I thought, wow, she has so much in common with Merwyn. It's crazy. But, it really wasn't a conscious inspiration. So I
Mhm.
don't feel guilty.
Yeah.
Oh, and
I
also
see. Yeah?
Elida's stepdaughters, they really don't like her that much because they feel that Elida, with this depressive and strange behavior, is very high maintenance. So she doesn't do any housework, she leaves it all to the girls, and so she takes up too much of their father's time. Instead of being the support that a wife is supposed to be, and letting him spend time with his children when he comes home, he ends up staying with her and asking her, what's going on? Are you sad? Are you happy? So the daughters are really annoyed with this, and they say that she will never ever belong with them, and that she will just go mad like her mother. So they also see her as someone very eccentric.
Wow, wow, I see. So it's kinda like how Merwyn's children also don't like her that much. Well,
Yeah,
except for
that's right,
Edgar, like,
but
he does
for
like her,
different.
but at the same time, he does see her as strange.
Yeah, that's true. Everybody sees her as strange, yes, because she is very much of an introvert. With Elida, I didn't get that impression. So well, in Merwin, I went a lot deeper into her character. But of course, with our knowledge of psychology, it was easier for me to do this.
Mhm. So, is Elita not an introvert then?
Maybe she is, but it isn't really clear. I mean, other than the fact that she spends time alone, it isn't. really clear. She also spends time alone because she is very isolated, and there aren't many people around other than her stepdaughters that she doesn't who don't like her. So she would like to be closer with them, but well, she is depressive after the death of her child. So presumably things were better before that. And she does have guests because people were, visiting each other. And this was one of the main occupations of people of the middle class in that time. So, no, she didn't seem to me as introvert as Merwyn, because Merwyn would not entertain guests at her house.
Oh, that's true. And also, I guess the different timeline too, and also the fact that Merwyn is a noble woman, right? So I
Mm.
think she could actually have the ability to choose to be more introverted. But if you don't have that power in your household, if you're just middle class, right? Maybe you don't have the choice to be to do the things that you want to do. So maybe Alida could be introverted, but we don't know because she's expected to have guests over, but she doesn't really have a say in that.
Yeah, I think so. Maybe. I mean, maybe she is an introvert, but definitely not as much as Medwin. She didn't really give that impression to me. She's rather someone who is depressive.
Right. And Merwyn is also depressive too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how is Elida's husband like and how is their marriage?
Dr. Wangel is a good man who loves her, and he loves his stepdaughters. And in order to keep the atmosphere light in the house, he avoids talking about unpleasant things. So the consequence is that there are always secrets around. He loved his first wife too, but she died. So his and Elida's marriage is rather one of convenience. Dr. Wangel was a widower, and he needed a woman to raise his daughters and to keep the house while he was out working. So he proposed to Elida, and she accepted to marry him because everybody said that it would be foolish to refuse a respectable man who promises to provide for you. So, well, she did because she didn't see that she has a choice. At the time, as a woman, you couldn't really afford not to get married unless your parents are really rich. But even then, what happens to you when they die? So, of course, having a husband, and especially someone who is really nice to you, and who has a respectable position, was a good thing to do. And we could discuss this in the relationship of the eldest stepdaughter and her tutor, because there we see a lot more about this importance of marriage in a woman's life and in everybody's life at the time.
Mhm.
So Dr. Wangel learned to love Elida, but she never really connected with him. And the little that they had was lost after the death of their baby. So, from her point of view, it's far from an ideal relationship.
I see. And I guess we'll talk about this later, but I would love to see the contrast between her relationship with her husband versus the one she had with the sailor.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, I actually have some quotes about
Hmm.
that.
But we'll talk about the stepdaughters first. So,
Okay.
what is her relationship with the stepdaughters, and how do the stepdaughters view marriage, especially, the stepdaughter that married the tutor?
So their relationship is cold. They spend a lot of time apart in different parts of the house, and the girls are the ones who keep the house, so they are very judgmental of her for not fulfilling the expected roles. The girls long for their father's affection and think that Elida is the reason why he isn't giving it fully. But interestingly, I think the girls are much more similar to Elida than they know. The eldest also feels trapped in this small town, and she dreams of going away to college and visiting the world. So, when her former teacher, a private tutor, asks her to marry him and promises to take her on journeys and studies, she accepts him even though she doesn't love him. And there is also a big age difference. So, for them, it is also a marriage of convenience. So even though she is judgmental of Elida, she sort of falls into a similar arrangement, which is good for her in the sense that if she remains in town with her father, she's not able to go to study. but this older man who is nice to her and who always liked her very much, and they had a good relationship, but there wasn't any kind of connection of that sort, at least not on her side. That man can offer her that. So she says, okay, between staying here and marry some guy that I also don't know and don't like, and remaining in this town and going away with my teacher, I'd rather do that. So they make this arrangement. And the youngest daughter, she is fascinated with death. She keeps spending time with a young sculptor who is going to die of a lung illness, but he doesn't know it yet. The girl knows because her father is the man's doctor. So she always looks at him and finds it fascinating how the young man keeps making plans for the future, and she knows that he is going to die. And this morbidity is one other thing that she has in common with Elida, but they don't know that because they don't communicate. So I think that the girls and Elida would have so much to discuss if only they tried to communicate.
That's true. They do have a lot of things in common. I think it's just the misgivings about each other that makes them really hard to communicate with, especially how the girls have a lot of resentment towards her for not doing housework and having all the responsibilities put on them instead.
Exactly.
Right. So, what does the sailor in Alita's life represent?
Definitely, like you said, and like we discussed in relationship to the folk tale, he's more of a symbol than a person, and not only in the book, but also to Elida. He represents the sea because his eyes are changing like the sea. They can be dark like the depths of the sea or glimmering like the sea under sunlight. So, this is the most striking thing about him. And this is exactly how the merman in Agneta and the Sea King is described. So this is something that Ibsen took word for word. He is freedom. He represents freedom and its dangers, and also he represents obsessive love. So the sailor is called the strangers throughout the play. We never really get to know what his real name is, and he takes up different names because he has to run from the law. So he keeps changing his names, and every letter he sends to her from all over the world, from California to China, he signs it with different names. So this sailor holds a strange, inexplicable power over her, and she is haunted by him, and he's almost a supernatural force like the merman. And when they were together and they fell in love, this love came abruptly and obsessively. They knew nothing about each other, and they only bonded over their love for the sea. And I quote, Elida says, "We talked about the sea, about storms and calm, of dark nights at sea, and of the sea in the glittering sunshine days we spoke also. But we spoke most of the whales and the dolphins and the seals who lie out there on the rocks in the midday sun. Isn't it wonderful? When we talked of such things, it seemed to me as if both the sea beasts and sea birds were one with him." So this is all they talked about. They barely even knew each other. But he represents that longing for freedom that she always had within her. And her husband, Dr. Wangel, when she tells him that, I knew nothing about him, the sea is everything we talked about, he wonders how could she get engaged to an absolute stranger. And this is what she says, and it's really important for the theme of marriage in that society. She says, "After all, I knew you even less, and yet I went with you." So, in her mind, these relationships are really the same because this is how she chose her own husband. She also knew nothing about him. The difference was that her husband was known as a respectable person, and he made it official, so to speak, whereas the sailor was someone who was kind of shady and running from the law. And they made a symbolic marriage, which was really beautiful because they threw their rings into the sea, of course. And In this way, their bond was somehow magical and somehow stronger than just a paper made by human hand. So the relationships between the two men are opposite and yet the same in this respect. And this was
Mhm.
true about all marriages at the time, or most marriages in historical times, because people got married without knowing each other, without having the time to actually form a connection. It was just a decision they had to make. So, how is this different from getting married to someone you have just met and you have been smitten with? There's really
Mhm.
not much of a difference, is it?
No, there's not. I guess it's only just an emotional reaction that's different. Like one's more rational, you could say, and the other's more emotional.
Exactly. So this is the question that Ibsen raises here, right? So what is real love? Which one of these is real love? Because both of them mean uh, a commitment to someone that you don't actually know, but one of them is socially acceptable and the other one isn't.
That's true. And in a way, they're both sort of transactional too, aren't they?
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Hmm. And all the marriages that are in this novel, I mean, play, also are transactional, especially the older daughter's marriage, because she is explicitly admitting that she's marrying the tutor because she wants to get out of her little town.
Exactly. So at first, when he proposes to her sort of because of a sort of a misunderstanding. The father writes to him and he says, "She needs you," but he means Elida because he thinks that the tutor will help Elida get out of her depressive state. But the tutor thinks and hopes that it was the girl who needed him. So he came sort of with the idea, oh, she still remembers me fondly. He's not that old. He is 37, I think. So
I see.
it's not it's not very creepy, at least for the time it wasn't. So, and the
It's
girl,
not
I think
60.
yeah, he's not 60, so maybe he is attractive. And the girl is like 17. So I guess for the
Oh,
time, it wasn't really something seen as creepy or out of the ordinary because she is the right age to go to college and to get married. So I assume she was something like 17. So anyway, when he proposes, she is shocked and she says that this is ridiculous. I never thought of you as more than my teacher. But then he says to her, and I quote, "But one day, when your father is no longer here, then perhaps to be left helpless and alone in the world, or to give yourself to another man whom you perhaps will also feel no affection for." And then the girl Bolette, she says, "I see how true all you say is. Perhaps it might not be so impossible after all. And after all, will you be my wife?" And she says, "Yes, if you still think that, you will have me." He thanks her. He's really, really happy. And he says that if I do not yet possess your whole heart, I shall know how to conquer it. I will wait upon you hand and foot. But what she cares about is not really this devotion, because she says, "And then I shall see something of the world. I shall live. You have promised me that." "Yes, and I will keep my promise, and I may learn everything I want to. I myself will be your teacher as formerly, Bolette." And she thinks, to know oneself free, and to get out into the strange world, and then not to need to be anxious for the future, not to be harassed about one stupid livelihood. So, for something that I've talked about in my historical writings as well, that for women, getting married was not, a foolish preoccupation because they are romantic. On the contrary, it was something that was very, very important to their lives because it determined their whole future. The kind of husband that you get will shape every thing else in your life, because if you have a husband who doesn't provide for you, you will not be able to make money yourself, so you depend on that. And if you have a husband who forbids you from doing different things, then you will not be able to do them unless, if you break away from your husband. How will you get your money? Most women became prostitutes and lived in the street if
Mhm.
they did that. So it was a very serious and very pragmatic concern. So it's not that they were, head in the clouds and thinking, oh, wow, I look so pretty in the white dress. It's not that. It was very, very pragmatic. It was like, we today we think about what jobs we want to have, what professions we want to follow. Women back then, especially the middle class, would only think about marriage because it was the most important thing for them.
Mhm. That's true. Very
And
true.
if you land a good marriage, then only then you have the time to think about other things because you get this off your heart, like Bolette says. So finally, once she has secured a husband who is very open minded, only then she can go out and see the world and study and everything else.
Mhm. And, I think that's a great ending for her, I think that's she made definitely the right choice.
That's true. That's true. So even though Ibsen was seen as very controversial because in A Doll's House, Nora ends up leaving her husband and her daughters, Ibsen is very, very nuanced. So by no means does he say that a woman proves to be strong and independent by not needing a man. On the contrary, he has all sorts of relationships portrayed
Mhm.
and a wide range of male and female characters portrayed. And of course, the conclusions are adapted to their personalities and their situations. And yes, in this case, it is a good choice for the girl. It is unfortunate that women didn't really have the possibility to choose, especially if they lived in a small town. So you basically had to wait for men to woo you, and then you had to choose. If you refuse a good man, then maybe nobody else will woo you for the rest of your
Mhm.
life, and you will end up alone. And when your father dies, what's going to become of you, right? So of course, if she had the power to meet a lot of men, and then she could choose from them all someone that met all her criteria, then sure, it would be great. But realistically, that didn't happen very often.
That's true. Yeah,
It's
she really
difficult
did
even
have.
in our time.
Right,
So
yeah, definitely she had limited choices given her isolated, surroundings, and, it's she's very lucky that this tutor, I know it was a misunderstanding, but he still came to the house at least, because there would be no other way for her to see him again.
that's true. That's true. And of course, there's no knowing what would happen to her afterwards because she wants to go to college and she tried to talk to her father about it, but her father is too captivated by his work and by his wife to really give any thought to his daughter's situation. So he always tries to postpone the discussion about her future. So now he doesn't have to because, of course, he wants her to marry someone really nice like the tutor. So
Mhm. How about the younger daughter? So is she going to be marrying the guy who is gonna die, the sculptor, or is it just like a friendship? What is it?
sorry. So well, not really, because the sculptor is sort of he has a crush on Bolette, who is the elder sister,
Mhm.
and he made her promise that she will think about him while he is away. He has this fantasy, this hope for the future of going to France or Italy, I think, anyway, somewhere in Southern Europe, where he thinks that he will be cured of his lung problem. So he keeps talking about that. And I think that the girl would sort of like to marry him because she keeps asking him, how do you think I would look in a black dress? So I think that she imagines herself in. As his widow, and she sort of fancies the idea. She's a really mischievous kind of character, and she says all kinds of outrageous things. And you can't really tell if she's just trying to be outrageous or she really fancies that idea. But she's an interesting character nonetheless. And she has also a very interesting conversation with the sculptor who gives a lot of insight into how women were perceived at the time, because she fancies him, but he says that a woman's role is to be an inspiration for her husband and to motivate him and to support him. So he keeps talking about oh, think how honorable it is for a woman to know that I will think of her and create art, and she will be the source of all that. So I don't think that the young sister, who is this kind of spirited girl, is really into the whole idea of just being a support for a man. But of course, she's very young, and the play doesn't end with them getting married or something.
That's true. Yeah, so it's pretty much open-ended.
Yeah, in her situation, yes. It doesn't say
Mhm.
how old she is, but she is quite young.
Mhm. So yes, I think we've covered all of our questions now, and the last question would be, how does Elita compare to Merwyn? But we already sort of addressed that. But now that we've talked about the other themes, including the stepdaughters, is there anything else you want to add about Elita versus Merwyn?
Well, I'd like to say that Ibsen has helped me a lot in order to understand mentalities in historical Norway. Because, sure, there is a huge difference between medieval Norway and 19th century Norway. But any historical setting, including Ibsen's, is valuable to me as a writer because they help me better understand the dynamics between people in a society with so many conventions and pressures, and society where people were much more isolated than they are nowadays, because both isolation and social conventions are important themes in my medieval writings and in Ibsen's as well. So definitely Ibsen's society is much closer to medieval Norway than our
Mhm.
world. So I've always find his plays eye-opening because I'm
Mhm.
so into historical fiction. Of course, it wasn't historical at the time because he was writing
That's
about events
true.
contemporary to himself, but to us, it is a historical setting and historical mentalities. Um, and I always find him eye-opening, and this is why I'd love to discuss more of his plays with you.
Definitely. We're also going to be talking about ghosts, right? And what was
Yes.
the other one that we wanted to talk about?
Hedda Gabler,
Oh, right.
and
Yes.
yeah, that's my favorite out of all Ibsen's plays. And also, there are lots of them. We really need to discuss the Vikings at Helgeland because, for someone who's into Vikings and who is a big fan of Ibsen, that's just really delightful. Ibsen writing about Vikings. Oh my God.
Right, exactly. I didn't know he actually did, so I need to take a look at that. And are we gonna be talking about The Doll's House? Because we talked a little bit about it today.
Yeah, we should talk about it as well. It is much more mundane than Hedda Gabler and Ghosts and The Wild Duck and Little Eyolf. He also has a play called Little Eyolf, but he has nothing
Oh,
to do with
wow.
my character Eyolf. And it's more mundane, The Doll's House, which is both good and bad. So it doesn't have suicides and all this striking tragedies and coincidences that a lot of his other plays have, but at the same time, I think that the psychology is much stronger and much more interesting in Hedda Gabler, as we will
Mhm.
see.
Right, I think so too. Yeah, so Hedda Gabler, I think you did mention previously, inspired your character Reinvig, right?
Yes, and that time the inspiration was um well, intent. I mean, not really intentional, but it was very conscious. And interestingly, I'm not sure people will see the connection between those two characters, but between Elida and Merwyn is just striking, even though I had no idea at the time that I was doing it. Maybe this is why it's much more subdued when it was a conscious thing.
Hmm. One last thing to end this podcast on. Do you think there's more inspiration, in terms of not direct and indirect, but just in general? Do you think there's more similarities between Lady from the Sea by Henrik Ibsen versus that Tolkien story you talked about that influenced Merwyn?
Ah, yes. Wow, I see. Well, that one was more conscious because when I read it, I had just created the Merwin novella, or I was writing it. I don't really remember, but that's a good question. I think that they are both quite similar. Wow, a comparison between Tolkien and Ibsen. I don't think
We
anyone has
should. We
done
should
that.
talk about that. Could you give us the name of the story by Tolkien again? Because I forgot.
Ah, I forgot. Just a second. I think it was the. I don't remember. Ah, what was it? I don't even remember the names of the characters. I'll think about it. Um, it was something with wife or something.
Let me look it up.
The. Hmm. Wow, I don't remember it right now, but I'll tell you, and we can write it down. I'll remember in a while.
Hmm. Yeah, I think we definitely need to look it up. Yeah, he has a lot of short stories, so it will take some time to find it, I think.
Yes, I think so. I think so. Oh, the mariner's wife. Yes, it is as simple as that.
Oh.
The mariner's wife,
Mhm.
Aldarion and Erendis. Yeah,
Mhm. Right. We should
it's part of
actually
the unfinished tales.
yeah, we should definitely compare that, Tolkien's tale to The Lady from the Sea. I think that would be very interesting.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And well, the idea there is quite different because they have a good relationship, but Aldarion puts the sea above his love for his wife. So he keeps going away at sea, and she is the one who stays at home and who feels sorrow at this. So I guess it compares in a way, but the characters are more they aren't as symbolic as the sailor in the Lady from the Sea.
Mhm. Yes. Well, thank you so much for, this amazing analysis on this awesome work. I can't wait to read it in full and watch, adaptations of it. It seems like a brilliant work.
Thank you so much for having me. I've also enjoyed talking about this a lot.
All right.